Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back to another edition. Thank you so much for listening on whatever platform you happen to be listening on. I greatly appreciate it. Today's topic is one that I know gets a lot of opinions and a lot of people feel very strongly about it because we are going to be talking about refereeing. We're going to be talking about officiating. And we are going to be hearing from somebody who's not only a coach, but is also an official and is going to bring in their perspective and their insights so that we understand a little bit more and can reflect a little bit more about what things are like for the person wearing the stripes and holding the whistle. So I am very happy to be joined by both a coach and by both an official at the same time, one Mr. Cade Murray. Cade, how are you today?
I am great, Coach Hernandez. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to get into this. I think it is so valuable for us to make sure that we are hearing from the officials and how the officials and the coaches and the players, how we can all work together to make this beneficial and a positive experience for everyone. So before we get into that, like I do with all of my guests, I want to talk about your journey. You have multiple journeys as one, you are a coach and you also are an official. So let's go ahead and get what's your basketball journey been? Where's it taken you and where are you at right now?
Sure. So again, my name is Cade Murray and I graduated from Darlington High School in small town Darlington, Wisconsin. To put it in perspective, it's about an hour, 15 minutes southwest of Madison. And I graduated from there just this past year, so I'm only 19 right now. I'm currently a student at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse up on the border about 2 hours southeast of the Twin Cities. I started officiating basketball when I was 16 years old. I started officiating youth tournaments. And that was my junior year. And then my senior year, I kind of got a little bit more involved into youth basketball officiating. And I actually ended up officiating my first JV game at 17 years old, right before I turned 18. And then just this past season, I've started officiating varsity basketball. I did play basketball in high school, so that's I have a really good background with it. And now I'm currently officiating, again, varsity basketball and also varsity football in the WIAA, which is the Wisconsin Intercollegiate Athletic Association, the IHSA, the Illinois High School Association, and the MSHSL, which is the Minnesota State High School League. And then on top of that, I am head coach for Team Wisconsin Murray Select, which is based out of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. The program is Team Wisconsin. And this is my first year coaching. I knew I wanted to coach when I was in high school on top of moving up levels in officiating. So I thought AAU was a fantastic opportunity for me to get involved in that. And we're currently rolling. Obviously it depends on where you are in the United States, whether basketball is going or not, but we've got 2 tournaments in. We got another big one coming up in Des Moines this weekend. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm pretty early in my journey, obviously, being so young, but it's been a thrilling experience so far. And I'm really looking forward to what's ahead.
Well, you talk about being young and just starting your journey. And when you told me how old you were, I was like, man, what was I doing at 19? And I'll tell you, it was not nearly as much at 19 years old. And it's quite remarkable to kind of have all of those hats. You had the playing hat, you have the coaching hat, you have the officiating hat. And like you said, you are only 19 years old, so you are just beginning your journey. And so I wanted to touch on that in particular about the fact that you are very young into your career, both as a coach and both as an official. And I think that a lot of times players, when they're done playing, when they're done with their senior year of high school, either they think that it's over and that's all they're going to do, or in some cases they might want to start coaching right away, or they might want to start officiating right away, but they don't feel like they're able to. And so what would you say to try and encourage maybe those right out of high school who are like thinking about and have the desire to get into coaching and officiating? What advice would you give them to kind of get them going on that journey?
Sure. I think it's spread your name, spread your voice. Say, I want to get involved. I know this is a fact around the country. If you are out there saying, I want to start coaching, I want to start becoming a basketball official or a football official or whatever, people will help you. My athletic director at my high school helped me connect with other officials. And now through him, I have tons of connections. And that's what it comes down to is start connecting with people, start talking to people. And when you do start, don't be afraid of criticism. Don't be afraid of the mean parents in the stands. I can tell you what, my first tournament that I ever officiated, I had criticism left and right because I didn't know what I was doing. It was my first time officiating. So my advice just to the kids who are like me, who are younger, is just don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be scared to send that email that says, hey, I'm looking to start officiating or stuff like that. I've never been afraid to send that email to a high school athletic director before, to try and build that network, to try and get games, and take that criticism that you get and build on it. I get critiqued all the time. I understand that, with being young, I need to absorb an information, whether it's coaching or officiating, to learn and build upon that, because I'm so young, I have so much more to learn. And that's just something, is that you got to be patient with the process. You just got to learn as you go. And if you can do that, if you can be patient, you'll make those big strides. You'll make those, you'll be officiating those state tournaments, or you'll be coaching in those state tournaments if you just build on your networks and take advice from other people. So that's my advice to the younger people, is just don't be scared to get your name out there and take criticism from other people and build. Just build. And eventually you'll get to where you want to be.
Well, I think it's reigns so true for so many professions. It's about getting your name out there, about building those connections and building those relationships. And I'm curious, I know in Arizona, we have a shortage of officials. Is it the same way over there? Or are you guys always kind of looking for new officials and looking to bring kind of that next generation in?
I think everywhere is looking for new officials. I know down where I live in a very rural area. I live, the biggest city in Wisconsin that I live closest to is Madison, which is an hour 15. The biggest city I actually live closest to is Dubuque, Iowa, which is about 40 minutes from me. But that's the same case there, is that they need officials. And up in lacrosse, I can say that it's fairly competitive. I was trying to get varsity games up in the lacrosse area, but it was a little bit more competitive because there were a little bit more officials there. It was a little bit hard to get in. I still ended up with 35 games, and I started out with, I think it was 6 at the beginning of the year. So I still ended up with 35 games this past season. So there's definitely a need, but at the same time, it can get competitive.
Right.
I guarantee you there's tons of officials in the Twin Cities, Chicago area. Filling those varsity games, I don't think is as much as an issue. It just gets to those rural areas where I think the need for officials is a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there are those needs that do exist in, like you said, different places, whether it's in a rural environment or elsewhere. But if you do get your name out, it sounds like the opportunities are going to be more available if you build those connections and you build those relationships.
Absolutely.
And also, you could speak to this, especially for those who are really looking to jump right in. I feel like if you are a coach and an official as you are, that your coaching will probably benefit a lot from being an official. Am I correct in saying that being an official will kind of help you if you're coaching?
I can absolutely agree with that. I remember back in the fall, before I started officiating varsity basketball, I was actually recruiting for my AAU team. I built the team from scratch this past year, and I was actually communicating with their high school coaches for the most part. The big school conference in lacrosse, I connected with just about every single one of those girls basketball coaches, just asking who's in the area. Do you think this kid can play at a high level? What can this kid get better at? So I had already made those connections. And when they heard I was an official, they say, oh, that's awesome. I don't think coaches are, they're definitely promoting the new officials too, because as much as you maybe see them pull up at them on the sidelines, they know in the back of their minds that there's a problem.
Yeah.
And so when you talk to them off the court, maybe, they're a lot more encouraging. And then when you finally meet them on the court, you're like, hey, you're that kid I talked about, my player or whatever. I'm really glad to have you, see you, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely building relationships with coaches has definitely helped me build, make it easier on me when I'm officiating them in game.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. Just the more comfortable you feel around somebody and the officials who go out of their way, even in my case, to like talk to me or get to know me, I feel a lot more comfortable with them and them with me. And it's not like this is some stranger who I've never met before who's officiating this game. Oh, it's, so-and-so, I've met them before, I know them. So kind of brings down maybe that initial tension a little bit.
I think being an athletic director and a coach really helps too. I think Wisconsin's very unique in terms of other states. I know in a lot of states, officials join associations, and then the association assigns you to your high school games. That's actually not how it works in Wisconsin. So in Wisconsin, each conference has a separate assigner. So there's over 50 assigners in Wisconsin. And then on top of that, for non-conference games, the school athletic directors actually do it.
Okay.
So if you have an athletic director and a coach, you're shaking their hand before you're even going to get changed. So you're already initiating that conversation with them. I think that really helps with those coaches who are athletic directors. If you're shaking their hands before the game even starts and you initiate conversation, there's already an easy tension there.
Right.
So I think that's really beneficial as well.
Yeah, just there's so much that could be solved and so much that can be accomplished by just having those conversations beforehand and just getting to know people and talking to people before the game even starts, and just any personal and human connection that could be made. I think it's just so beneficial for everybody to be able to put a name to somebody, to put a face to somebody and recognize somebody and have those introductions. It really does go a long way. And then
absolutely.
Going to what you said about coaching, there are opportunities. I started coaching, my first time coaching, I was a senior in high school. I volunteered. It was a disaster, but I was able to do it, and I learned something from it, and I got something from it. So I think, and I'll ask this to you too, because I think it's important for especially younger people to hear. Uh, have those older, more experienced coaches and older and more experienced referees, have they been excited to pass down knowledge and teach you? Are they excited to kind of take you under their wing a little bit?
Oh, they're absolutely thrilled. They love seeing new blood coming in, especially because there's such a shortage right now. There's even a shortage of coaches where I go to college at. I know there were a couple big high schools that were looking for freshman coaches because no one really wanted to coach. But I think it really speaks true to officials too.
Yeah.
There are older officials that will gladly mentor you, gladly break down your film. I have one official who lives in the Wisconsin Dells who actually he talks to me almost every single week. He is absolutely 100% a huge beneficiary to me when it comes to asking questions, or can you evaluate me this game? He's like my lifeline when it comes to stuff I need to know. So I totally agree with you there. They love seeing new blood, and they will gladly take you in and mentor you and get you to where eventually we're there at. So
yeah. It seems like the message is pretty consistent. If you want to coach, go coach. There's opportunities. If you want to go officiate, you can do it. Just build those relationships, and opportunities will present themselves. So that's good to hear. And especially on the official end, I know, like I said earlier, we are always looking for new officials. A lot of our officials we currently have are getting up there a little bit in age, and the more new ones we can get, the better. I think that's awesome. So
absolutely.
we are going to get into the topic here about what the game looks like from an official's perspective. And so for newer coaches, this would be an opportunity to kind of get a little insight about what an official thinks. For veteran coaches, this is an opportunity maybe for a little bit of reflection and a little bit of just reminding ourselves about what the officials go through and what their experience is like. So I think this is beneficial for everybody. So let's go ahead and get started here. A lot of coaches are familiar mostly with the rules and the play and the rule book and what's allowed and what's not allowed. Most have a good grasp, I think, of that. However, in your experience, what are some things that you and your officiating crew are looking for or observing that maybe coaches aren't aware of? And how is your perspective of things a little bit different than what the coach is seeing on their sideline?
Well, I think the main thing is I don't think all coaches understand officials' primaries. So I'm going to stick to 3-man crews, but a lot of this speaks true to 2-man crews too in some cases. But with 3-man crews, we have the lead, which is the official that is under the baseline. We have the center, who's the official usually on the opposite of the lead. He's over there by himself. He kind of sits at about free throw line extended. And then we have the trail, who is the official that's on the same side as the lead, kind of sits about 3-point arc area. But what it really comes down to is primaries. I'll take a great example on a rebound. Let's say 3-point shot goes up. The ball bounces off the rim and is up in the air for grabs, and we got big players battling underneath, right?
Yep.
Well, we would look at the lead, who's down on the basket, and we would maybe say, you are the one who needs to be calling all the pushing, the quote unquote over the back. That's not really even a foul that coaches keep on saying. That drives me absolutely nuts. Just rebounding stuff like that. When in reality, let's say the 3-point shot came from the trail's primary. Okay, so now the trail has the shooter up and down. He's focused on the shooter. The center is stepping inside, and he's actually looking at most of that rebounding action. So a lot of crews that I talk to, a lot of veteran officials in Wisconsin that I work with have say, if we want rebounding fouls going the other way or staying put, we want them coming from either the trail or the center because they have a better view there. The lead often gets blocked up, especially if the rebound's going opposite side and he gets straight lined. Then you can't see that contact, that push. Whereas with the center can maneuver around a little bit more, has a little bit more freedom and flexibility because he has that whole sideline that he can see in there, and he can see that push, and he's the one who should be making that call. Now, that doesn't mean that the lead official cannot make a call there if it's in front of him and he sees it. After all, he is mostly focused on in the lane.
Yeah.
But I think what some coaches just need to understand is officials' primaries. I'll take another example of maybe an illegal screen. When it gets to kind of the top of the key area, especially if you get crews who have not worked together before, it can get a little dicey in terms of whose primary is it. And let's say that it works into the center's primary, then the trail is darting his head down kind of towards into the lane, kind of looking at the off-ball action there. Well, then the center maybe misses an illegal screen. All officials miss calls. It's going to happen. You are not perfect by any means. But then all of a sudden there's an illegal screen there. The coach sees that, the center does it, but then he's getting on the trail. And that's something that I think needs to be understood is that you got to know if you're going to ask a question, if you're going to complain to an official, make sure it was in his primary.
Yep.
I think some coaches do a great job of, why would he not call that? And the official who maybe could respond and say, hey, coach, we'll get him over here to talk to you about his opinion. I think another thing that really comes down to, I don't know how they do it in Arizona, but I know how they do it in Illinois and Minnesota. A lot of times, especially when I go down and work in Illinois, I have about 10 games in Illinois next year in the NUIC conference. I'm with different officials every single time. And every official calls the game differently, right? Yep. Well, in Wisconsin, I'm kind of used to working with the same 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 guys. I have a really good feel for how they call the game. The consistency is really there in terms of what's getting called on both ends. Sometimes when you get paired with an official, especially for me, out-of-state official, I have never worked with any of these guys before. They might call the game a little bit differently than me. So let's say that they call a foul with minimal contact underneath the rim, but then I end up being down there as the lead on the next possession, and that same type of contact occurs, but I don't call the foul. Now he's getting on me, and he's wondering why we just got that call. Why are we not getting it again? If you kind of understand what I'm saying. So the consistency needs to be there, but coaches need to recognize that, especially they should know how their assigner is assigning officials. And if they know that their assigner is putting 3 officials who have never worked before with each other before, maybe only once or twice before, every single time for their games, then they got to have patience. And they got to realize that the consistency may not be there with all of the officials.
Well, I think that's an important point for coaches to recognize as they're kind of going through their games and going through their season, is you're going to recognize and pick up pretty quickly on who the officials are, and in some cases the pairs or the trios of officials that tend to work together. And I think it is something important for a coach to recognize when they see maybe a combination they've never seen before. They see like somebody they don't recognize with somebody that they do. That is something that I think would be beneficial for coaches to keep in the back of their head, to say like, okay, this looks a little different, or this pairing is a little bit different. So it might look a little bit different on the court and may not necessarily be how I am used to it being. I think that is something that would be important.
And that's why the officials pregame locker room conference is so important. I have really good pregames sometimes with crews that I've never worked before. And then sometimes I get with officials who just don't care and they don't want to have a pregame.
Yeah.
Well, we're screwed then, you know, it boils down to that. And I think coaches do have a good idea because they often get the same officials that are working in their conference for X amount of years. And they can recognize who are the officials who maybe don't care and the officials that do care. I'll take a great example. The second boys varsity game I ever officiated, I actually had to give out a technical. And I don't like giving out technicals.
Okay.
I give them when they're needed, and I'm not hesitant to give them, but I don't like giving them. And I'll take a great example. I worked with 2 officials who did not have very much varsity experience like myself. And to be honest, you know, we maybe shouldn't have been working that game together because it was I don't know how you guys do your high schools in terms of divisions and stuff, but we do divisions in Wisconsin, just like how the NCAA does it. And it was a Division II game, and there's 5 divisions. So Division II is a pretty big school. Yeah. And it was a Division II high school game with not a lot of experience. And my other 2 partners were calling a lot of fouls, which is fine. I'm not saying that my partners were not good officials, and they just called the game how they wanted to call it. But we didn't really have a pregame. Well, myself, who just lets a little bit more contact go, you know, that coach started riding me a little bit. Eventually got to the point where, okay, coach, I'm sorry, I got to give you a technical. And I think, you know, I almost feel bad in giving that technical, because he was getting those calls all game from those other 2 officials, you know, and that's not how I called the game. And I don't really like starting to call a ton of fouls on my end, because I'm a big believer in letting the kids play and really watching for the legal or illegal contact versus just contact. So, you know, he really getting on me. I had to give a technical, and that's one that's just sat in the back of my mind. I was like, you know, that could have been prevented if we would have had a good pregame. We would have talked about our stuff at halftime, and we would have had a much better game. It ended up being a really close game too, was the part that sucked. You know, you never want to be, you never want to be in that situation where you're giving out a technical, you're not on the same page with your partners, and it's a 2-point game. So I think coaches just need to be patient. They need to recognize the officials that they have, and they need to understand how they call the game.
Well, that's an interesting point that you bring up, because I think I've made this assumption before, and so I'm sure there might be other coaches who have as well, who just assume that all the officials are just on the same page, and it's going to be called like absolutely the same way from one official to the other. Like there's a shared mindset that all of you have, and that, as you mentioned, if that conversation isn't taking place, then you kind of end up having those inconsistencies that I know that you're trying to avoid having, so that it doesn't look uneven or inconsistent in any way. So that was something that I wasn't I wasn't aware of it. I didn't realize that some officials like just didn't have those conversations or didn't want to have those conversations.
It's honestly, I don't understand how you can go through without it. I can get the idea of you just want to go out and officiate, but if you just don't have a good pregame conference with the officials that you work with, especially if you don't work with them very often, it's not gonna be a good game. It's not gonna be a good series of games.
Yeah.
I found the tendencies that up in lacrosse, there are really good pregame conferences. We go over a lot of rules. We go over game situations from the casebook of the NFHS. But then I come down here and it's more of, let's go ref. And I'll tell you right now, in my home area, I have actually had probably my worst games down here because I just don't feel like I'm on the same page with other officials that I didn't know before. It's different with officials from my hometown because, I grew up with them. I kind of mentored under them. Then we're a little bit more on the same page. We don't have to have as in-depth of a pregame conference. But when it comes to, I'll take an example of I had a really big conference game in a small school conference down here. And it ended up being an okay game. And they were two good officials that I was working with. And we didn't have the best of the pregame conference. So I didn't go in there as comfortable. I didn't go in there saying, I got this. We're going to nail this as a crew. I kind of went in saying, okay, how do these guys call the game? And luckily they ended up calling the game a lot like me. And the game didn't go terrible. But what I'm getting at is just the pregame conference. If it's not there, it can be so frustrating. So,
well, that sort of makes me think of what something I brought up earlier about if you recognize that there's an officiating pairing or trio that you don't see normally, then it might be worthwhile in a respectful way as a coach to just say like, hey, did you guys like talk? Did you guys have like a conference or like are you guys like good? Are we on the same page? And I don't know what the answer would be to that, but it might show some consideration for that, and as a coach to be like, hey, like maybe that pair has worked tons together, but they just never worked in that particular game for that coach. But that might be something definitely worth considering doing. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, I saw or heard, excuse me, in one of your answers, you talked about over the back, and so I wrote that down. All right, over the back, I know something that drives you a little nuts, and we talked a little bit about screening and things like that. And so I think this is really important for all coaches to hear. What are things that you find in your crew find that you're blowing the whistle a lot because the skill or whatever the case may be, it's being taught poorly? So things that are being taught poorly by coaches, which cause you and your crew to consistently consistently have to blow your whistle.
Yeah, there's a lot here. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just a different interpretation of how coaches take things. Let's start with legal guarding position. Legal guarding position, by rule in the NFHS, states the defensive player must establish an initial legal guarding position by facing the player with the ball and having both feet on the floor. The defensive player may remain stationary, jump vertically, move laterally or backwards in order to maintain the initial legal guarding position. So what does that mean? So I think a lot of coaches, they really, really, really stress up-tempo defense. They want to get turnovers. They want to play aggressive, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a coach like that. I want to cause turnovers. I want high-pressure defense. But I think is where it gets kind of interesting is what's legal contact. I know it doesn't apply as much in AAU because, for granted, AAU has just gotten such a bad rep with officials that you end up getting not experienced. But I'm just not going to get into that. But when it comes to school ball, officials are taught legal guarding position. When I go to clinics, we are looking at film. Was this player legal? All right. Is there a foul warranted here or not? So I think some coaches don't stress on legal guarding position as much. They just say, okay, be aggressive. And then they wonder why they're getting into foul trouble. They wonder why these fouls are getting called. Because again, with me, I let contact go, right? I let contact that's legal go. Right. So when some officials may also not understand legal guarding position and they may just blow a whistle for contact, then it gets a little bit dicey and it gets a lot of tension there. But I think what coaches just need to teach is legal guarding position and understanding it, understanding when they make an argument against it. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I do as a coach that I recognize when I have pretty good officials, I've had the privilege to have some college officials actually run my AAU tournaments because they're just they want to get into officiating so much again. Yeah. So I actually can ask them, hey, how was my player not legal there? And they can answer, oh, her knee stuck out. She wasn't lateral. She didn't move the way a legal player should move. And then I'm like, okay, I understand that because I know where you're coming from with that. I think that's something that a lot of coaches don't do. They just say, why is that a foul? Or that's bullcrap, stuff like that. When they should, a simple question of how are they not legal? I think that goes a long way. Something that I do that I have seen some coaches do as a drill, and what I actually kind of want to adopt on my own is they will do what's called the zigzag drill. And basically what it is you have I have all my girls partner up and I have them go in a zigzag. I kind of have them go, imagine about the space of the lane and widthwise, and then going all the way down the court. And I have them do zigzags, and I have the defensive players hold tennis balls. Mm-hmm. And I say, if that tennis ball touches the player, you're not legal, because did it say anywhere in that legal guarding position definition that I read earlier, did it say anything about hands?
Right.
No.
Right.
It's the hands got to stay off. And I think that was a point of emphasis going into my senior year. I didn't pay as much as the rules back then, but it was hand checking. Hand checking was a point of emphasis because there was so much illegal contact with the hands, and coaches were promoting it. They were saying, hey, get your hand on the hip, bother them. And as soon as they go to make a move and that hand resists or restricts their movement, then it's a foul. It should be a foul. And then coaches are wondering why they're getting hit with that. I'm like, coach, he wasn't legal. That's not legal contact. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't have the rule off the top of my head. But I had a situation in a game this year. I had a Hall of Fame coach. He actually, unfortunately, he just retired. He was a great coach. For those who are listening, it was Andy Manasic from Prairie du Chien, who might be from around here. He is one of the best coaches that I have ever officiated. He is one of the best coaches that I've ever played against. He's overall just a fantastic coach. And I had him in a game this year, and his best player was guarding the other team's best player and was putting his hand on his face. And I don't have the rule off the top of my head, but that's actually a technical foul. That's not legal. Right. And he's wondering, how isn't that legal? I'm like, well, technically, not only is it a technical foul, but how is that legal guarding position? You putting the hand on the face. That's restricting eyesight. That's restricting balance.
Yeah.
So I think coaches just really need to understand legal guarding position and teaching it right. Like I said, that zigzag drill that I do, where the players hold tennis balls, that helps a lot. And we don't get into foul trouble in our games in AAU. Granted, we have a really deep bench. I have 11 players on my roster, 11 fantastic kids that I love to coach. Yeah. But we don't get into foul trouble because I stress so much in my practices. I say, stay legal. When a kid goes to reach, to try and get the ball, I hate that. I hate it when players go and try and reach across the body, because that's a guaranteed foul every single time.
Yep.
At least from from around here, that is a foul every single time. Too. I go, stay legal. I say don't reach, I don't say don't reach. I either say move your feet or stay legal. I think my players have gotten a really good comprehension of that. At least I think they have. But I think that's just something that the coaches don't really stress on that much. And I'll say another thing is verticality. Some coaches may not understand what's legal verticality and what's not legal verticality. And I'll take a really good example of this. Let's say a player is posted up on the block, right? Yep. And my defender is straight up, hands are straight in the air, body is square, okay? They're in perfect legal guarding position, vertical, right? Mm-hmm. And the player goes up for a jump hook or some sort of post move, and the player simply jumps up in the air. Yep. They don't initiate any contact. The defensive player does not initiate contact, all right, but they jump up in the air, and the offensive player creates contact, and it may create an ugly shot, or the ball may not go in. And now a coach is complaining to an official, she jumped in the air. That's not legal. And that's not correct, because I think what a lot of coaches think is that verticality is you have to be standing. And that's not true. Verticality extends through the heavens.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I'm concerned,
Stay
you
straight,
can jump
stay
up as
upright.
high as you want. You stay straight, you stay upright, you are legal. And I think that's something that coaches may not understand. I think officials have gotten a lot better. I know it wasn't that great when I was in high school, but I think it's gotten a lot better of officials understanding verticality. And officials now understanding verticality are getting more complaints about it because the coaches haven't quite understood it yet. So I think that's something that coaches really, really, really need to understand is verticality. What is vertical? What is not vertical? I will agree. As soon as the hands come down, all right, then coaches are like, well, how was she not legal? I'm like, well, she didn't maintain verticality. That includes the hands. As soon as those hands come down, or even, I don't really tend to whistle it at a slight angle, but when a noticeable angle is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
They're going to get hit with a foul for that, especially if they initiate contact. So I think coaches just need to understand verticality, what is legal and what's not legal. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on was screens, team control fouls, specifically illegal screens.
Yep.
So what is a good screen? So a screen is almost like verticality. You got to stay stationary. You got to keep a legal position, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what a lot of coaches don't understand is kids will stand there and they'll cross their arms across their chest and then they'll stick their elbows out. That is not legal. That's not legal at all. And then the coaches, they may not see that. They may just see their player stationary, and then they're wondering why they got hit with a team control foul. And I go, coach, you can't extend the elbows. Think of it almost like a rectangle. You have to stay within that rectangle. As soon as those elbows go outside that rectangle and initiate contact, that's an illegal screen. Same thing can go with the knees. I see a lot, and I mean a ton of players stick their knees out and try to catch each other's legs. That's dangerous.
Yep.
That is very dangerous, and that should be hit with a illegal screen call every single time. I know illegal screens maybe not are as whistled as much because you may get officials who don't like to watch the primaries, and then they get missed. But the biggest thing, is just when you're going to set a screen, you got to stay stationary. I stress that to my players because we have a lot of screening in our offense. I say, you got to become set before you set that screen, because if you get an illegal screen call because you were there late and you initiated illegal contact, I'm going to be really upset with you because that's a turnover.
Yeah.
So I think that's just something that a lot of easily preventative fouls and turnovers can be taught by those three things: with legal guarding position, verticality, and legal screens. Well, those are my big three right there.
So for the first two, it's a kind of a clear message, kind of for us as coaches. It's watch what the hands are doing on defense. Watch what you're doing.
Yeah.
When you're reaching, you're trying, you're coming down on somebody when they're posting up on you with your hands. Just be mindful of what your players' hands are doing, and then the screening thing. I'm glad you mentioned that. There's a girl I coach now. Won't mention her name, but she gets into a little overzealous with the screening, and a couple times she'll look at me and be like, coach, like how is that illegal? And I'll be like, well, because you shoulder checked her. Like, what do you like you threw out your shoulder at her. And the knees, I definitely agree. I've seen that a couple times, and that will get me up and going. Once I see like the knees sticking out and things like that, like you said, it's dangerous, and it's not a screen. It's practically tripping each other at that point. So
I think we're very fortunate as coaches that was an NFHS point of emphasis. I'm trying to think, the 2018-2019 school year, that was a point of emphasis with screens. And officials started watching that. I remember in a game, I'm not going to mention the school or the player because I actually know the player, and he got hit with 3 illegal screens in one game.
Wow.
3 out of his 4 fouls were illegal screens. And I just remember me being as an official on the bench, I'm just watching there, and I'm seeing, or when I was in the game, I just watched there. I said, yeah, that's an illegal screen every time. You can't stick your shoulder out. So I think if coaches are having a trouble with that, my recommendation is just try to put in their head the rectangle vision. Okay, if you don't maintain that rectangle, you're gonna get hit with an illegal screen.
Yep. Yeah. It's seems simple enough, and I think, like you said, about being stationary. So if you're teaching good screens, and if you're a coach who's teaching their players how to screen, and you picture what a good screen looks like, there's not going to be any limbs sticking out. There won't be a knee
Right.
sticking out, or a
Exactly.
shoulder and elbow sticking out, or anything like that. So keeping that in mind,
Yep.
because that's a safety thing. That's a huge safety thing. So
Absolutely.
glad that you
Yep.
mentioned that. So as you were talking, and the verticality part got me thinking, especially. So we talk about the referees, they're making the calls about, they didn't maintain verticality, for example, and so a foul gets called on the defender, and then a coach will get on you about that. And then you go to explain it and whatever. And I've had situations like this. This is where I bring it up, where there'll be coaches who will say, like, oh, like, I know that the ref made the right call, but I'm just working the official just so I can get calls later. Is that, and it seems like it's such a common practice that I'm curious if that even exists. Is that something that really does exist, where coaches believe that, like, oh, I'm just gonna keep riding the official and working the official so I can get calls in my favor later? Is that something that you and your crew or your crews are aware of? Is there any truth to that? I've always been curious about that.
It definitely exists. And I think what sometimes drives away younger officials is that coaches know they got the right call, but they still question them anyways, to question their knowledge, to try and ride them and try and get calls in their favor. I am very fortunate that I am mentally tough when it comes to that stuff. That stuff does not faze me. If a coach rides me, okay, whatever. He didn't agree with me, you know. And I think it was actually funny. I'll bring up a little story. On the last varsity game that I officiated, there was I'll admit it, I had a bad call.
Mhm.
It shouldn't have, it should not have been a player control foul. It should have been a foul, or a play that I let go. But I called a block and then a made field goal and then one free throw.
Yeah.
And the coach talked to me about it, and I said what I thought was the case, and I turned out being wrong. But at that time, I thought I was right.
Yeah.
So then we go down to the other end, and there was a push in the back on the other team's player. So it went on the baseline. So then I rotated up to the trail position. Right after that, a 3-point shot was put up, and it went in. And then the kid came in late and boxed. Basically did not let him come down to the ground safely.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was almost instantaneous. He made that contact. It was not a safe play. It was a foul, and he made the 3-point shot right after that, and they got the one free throw. And he brought me over. He coached me in high school, and he had actually taken on a new head coaching job. And we're really good buddies now. He's one of the couple teachers I still talk to outside of in college now. But he goes to me, he's like, so he is going to complain to you about that call, and then you go and give him 2 calls down here. And I said, no, that's not what I'm about. And then we were talking after the game. He's like, oh, I was just testing you or whatever. And as much as I love him, he can't be doing that stuff, because he does that to another young official. What's going to happen then? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're going to start thinking, their minds are going to start grinding gears, and then they're not going to be into the game, and you're not going to get consistent calls.
Yeah.
So, I think it's something that coaches need to stop doing, because I think it's ultimately driving away officials, and it might drive them away from your game too. Those officials who are getting experience now, they have the options of where they want to ref. They can see a team on a contract and say, no, I don't want to deal with that coach, because you
Yeah.
laugh, but it's true.
Oh, I
It's
laugh
very
because I know
true.
it's true.
There's power there with
Yeah.
officials now.
Yep.
So I think what coaches can't be doing that stuff. I think that's absolutely unacceptable. And I've never done that as a coach. Granted, I've only gotten in 8 games in my coaching career. But that's something that I'll never do, because it's just flat out just wrong. I will say one thing like this. In my AAU tournament, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, I thought one of my players was absolutely legal.
Yeah.
And part of legal guardian position is moving side to side, right? We can move laterally, as long as you are maintaining your own space, your own rectangle, as I like to call it. And she moved to the side and she obstructed the player's path before she got there. And she made a difficult shot and she got called for a foul. So then when I went to go talk to an official, I said, how is she not legal? And he goes, she moved. Or he goes, she moved. And I go, okay. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking she did absolutely nothing wrong there. So I think that's something with officials, you know, in a varsity game, in a game that's a little bit more up, you know, higher stakes, I might ride him a little bit. I might go, where is it saying in the rule book that she can't move? You know, as long as she's maintaining legal guardian position, she can move all she wants. But you know, I don't like to ride the officials because obviously, you know, I know what that's like. I do have to blame myself a couple times that I have kind of rode the officials in these past 8 games, but I'm not going to get to that. I might get to that later. But the point that I'm getting at is that coaches, you know, in those situations, then it can be okay to make an argument. You know, then it can be okay kind of to ride them a little bit. I'm not encouraging it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not encouraging it. But what I'm getting at is saying if you see an official that you disagree with, just kind of have a conversation with them. I'm not saying, you know, like you will do a terrible job. You know, you got the call absolutely wrong. Just kind of have a conversation with them. Well, that's not what it is in the rule book, right? Right, sir? And, you know, you might end up having a conversation and then you might actually get the answer to your question.
Yeah.
So, you know, when it comes to that stuff, you know, don't ride officials if you know they're right. If you think they're wrong, ask respectfully.
Yeah. Well, it makes a lot of sense to ask as opposed to writing the officials. And one of the reasons for me in particular is I'm thinking that if I ask official something in the first quarter, if I think that a call was incorrect and I'm not sure why they made that call, if I ask an official their reasoning, maybe I don't agree with it, but at least I know how they're probably going to call it the rest of the game. And so I can manage that accordingly. Like it helps me as a coach get some knowledge too.
Right.
And then at the end of the game, I can say like, hey, like in the rule book or, you know, this, that, or the other, this is what I think it is, like have more of a conversation that way. But I feel like it's more of a benefit when coaching your team to understand like, okay, well, this referee's like letting this go or not calling this or, you know, calling this a certain way. And so it just helps, I think, with in-game adjustments too.
That's a great comment. Good coaches will adapt to how the officials are calling the game and not try and change the way the officials are calling the game. Mm-hmm. They will adapt. And that's what separates those coaches who are making regional contests and losing in the first or second round of the playoffs to those coaches who are at state. That's just flat, you know, that's part of what separates coaches from great coaches. So I think that's an excellent point that you bring up there.
Well, going with that, we just talked about coaches and their relationship with officials, and I want to briefly touch on players. I've heard a few different philosophies. I've worked with and under coaches who say like you don't talk to the official. I've worked with coaches who've also believed it's okay to ask a question, but like don't do anything more than that. Are you as an official, and I know you're only speaking for you and your crew, and so we're just getting that perspective, but are you okay with conversation? Obviously respectful, but are you okay with conversation if the players ask or question something of yours, or is there a preference that you've noticed between you and the crews that you've worked with?
I encourage it. As a coach, as an official, creating relationships with players, that only benefits you in the long run. I think it is absolutely awesome. I think it also says a lot of character about a player when they respectfully ask me a question. I've had some players who have asked me stuff and I've answered it and they'd go, okay, thank you, sir. And then I actually end up talking to them a little bit throughout the game. Establishing relationships with players is absolutely awesome. And I highly encourage it. I don't think there's a single thing wrong with it. And there are not many officials that I have worked with who have not. I don't even think I've ever worked with an official who has not encouraged it. I think that's something that coaches should lighten up on a little bit. Now, when it comes to riding them, okay, that's a different story. When they start complaining to them, But if they ask a simple question, hey, sir, what do I do there? But, it may not be as, as structural as what a coach would ask, but, it recognizes what they're saying. If they commit a foul and they don't know what they did wrong, just say, you weren't legal there, or you stuck your elbow out there, man, or stuff like that. Being so young with myself, especially when I'm officiating boys teams, I'll talk to the kids a ton in dead ball situations. They'll just say, hey, why is this a foul on this kid or whatever, or sometimes they'll even ask me about their teammates. They'll say, hey, is he getting on you? Really good players and leaders will actually do that. They will ask me, is he getting upset with you? Is he starting to, throw elbows or stuff? And I'll go, oh yeah, he's getting a little riled up. And, I don't want to have to give him a warning or technical.
Yeah.
Or no, he's all right. And those players, those leaders will talk to them about it, and they will end up calming them down. So I think it is just super important. I mean, super important that players establish relationships with officials when possible. So
no, I'm glad to hear it. I think that like I've mentioned before, like we all should be working together. The officials, the coaches, and the players are all working together. And I think part of that comes with having open, honest, positive communication to kind of build that connection that the coach or that the officials are working with the players in order for everybody to be in an environment that's successful. So
absolutely.
With that, what about because I have this situation and I'm never quite sure what the end result is in it. So I'm curious about how you and the officials you've worked with handle this. Are there situations you've encountered where players, respectfully, mind you, players are concerned that like maybe somebody like guarding them is like being way too physical, or I've had girls of mine say like, hey, like so-and-so who's guarding me or whatever, like they keep like cussing at me or they keep like doing this, that, or whatever. I'm like rebounding and things like that. Is that something that you've encountered where players address concerns about the team that they're facing, about their opponents? And if so, kind of how does that dynamic go, or does it change anything? Is that helpful to do, or helpful for players to do too?
I encourage that as well, and I don't encourage it as, hey, or I'll just take my high school self talking to an official. Hey man, watch the hand check, or dude, he totally pushed me in the back. I would go on a dead ball. I go up to the official. I say, hey sir, can you please watch the hand checking? Okay, it's getting a little out of control. And this is the same with the coaches. I've had some coaches who I have great relationships with. Just go, hey, Cade, listen, I'm not sure if it's really going on or not. My players saying they're getting hand checked a lot. Can you please just watch for it? Mm-hmm. That's the key words right there. Watch for it.
Yeah.
If you tell us to watch for it, we will watch. Good officials should watch for it. And I mean, they should be watching for it anyways, but maybe they should be taking a little bit of a closer look at it. Mm-hmm. And in that case, I am all for that. And he comes to me the second time. He's like, hey, Cade, we really think we're getting hand checked here. Can you please watch that? And I'll just say, Coach, I've already been watching it here. I'm not really seeing enough to warrant a foul. I'm sorry. Or don't necessarily say I'm sorry, but basically say, listen, this is just how it is. I'm not going to be calling the little bump or stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that's great that players and coaches just respectfully ask, can you please watch this? Because we will. Good officials will do that. So I absolutely 100% encourage that.
Well, it's good to hear, because that's kind of what I encourage, because I think that it's important for players to learn how to advocate for themselves, and I think it's important for them to learn how to speak up, and if there's a concern, players speak up about it. And then if the coach has already been respectful to the official throughout the game, when it comes time to them noticing something, I think officials will probably be a little bit more receptive to hearing out that coach who's been respectful the whole game and has been like kind and whatnot, versus the one who's been screaming your ear off and then telling you, go look for the hand check too. And
right, we're not gonna be listening to you at that point if you're gonna scream at us the whole game and then start trying to play nice. That's not really how it works.
Yeah,
we're gonna try and work with you the best you can, but as soon as you start breaking barriers, it's going to be a lot harder for you the rest of the game, quote unquote, trying to get calls, or just in general, just trying to get officials to watch things.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I'm really glad to hear that too about you and a lot of your crews when it comes to with players. I know I'm pretty I'm pretty hardcore. If a player gets a technical, they sit out the whole game, and then at the end of the game, they
That's the same way. That would be the same way with me. You know, I
Yeah.
haven't really had that happen to me yet. None of all my girls haven't said anything to the officials, but if they were to get a technical, yeah, they'd sit the whole game.
Yeah,
because that's unacceptable.
Yeah, my players, they sit the whole game, and then they have to personally apologize to every referee for whatever it is that they did. Even if they didn't think they did anything, they better apologize. But that's just me. That's my own philosophy. And like I said, just positive communication, I think, and just seeing the referees as not like enemies and not like things you have to overcome, but like ones who are working with you to make sure that the game's being done the right way. I think it's just a good mindset shift.
Communication is just so important. I mean, if you can communicate with an official, granted, the official better be communicating back with you. It's a different story if you go to talk to an official and he goes, "Shut up." You know, no, that's not how I am at all. You know, talk to the officials. Just be kind to them, and just talk through them with things, and they will work with you. They will be with you till the very end of the game. Both sides, both coaches, they will work with you the whole entire way to the rest of the game. So I think that's just super important. And something I know I might be getting a little off topic here.
No, I'll go for
but
it.
I think it is super important that coaches give feedback. In the WIA, I can't speak for whatever Arizona does, or what many other states in the US do. But in the WIA, coaches have the option to rank you as an official. So they can rank you through 1 through 6, 1 being the worst, 6 being state level quality. And at the end, we just get to see averages. We don't get to see individual scores. At least that's how it works in the WIA. But the thing that sucks is that's optional. And I reffed 35 games this year, right?
Yeah.
So I should have 70 rankings, and I only had 40. Granted, you know, that's pretty good. I got a pretty good. That's actually a phenomenal ranking percentage in Wisconsin. Is 40 to 70, which in my opinion is not okay. I think either associations need to rank officials or coaches just need to do it because it's super important. I will tell you that if I am getting ranked by a coach consistently, I'm going to want to officiate games for them. And I think, you know, those coaches who are athletic directors, you know, I think every single coach that I had as an athletic director this past year ranked me. But I think that's just super important. And another thing is giving feedback to your assigners. Because what it comes down to, my assigner in Illinois that I work for, he's a former college official and he is a phenomenal person. I don't know him very well, but the little that I've met, that I've been able to talk to him, he actually observed and evaluated me in one of my games there. He's a super awesome guy, but he gets feedback from other coaches. Those coaches are telling him, hey, these are the officials that work with us. They do a good job. They call the game consistently. You know, these are the guys that you should be giving more games. Coaches need to communicate with, whether it is their assigner, whether it is their conference commissioner, whether it is their athletic director. They need to communicate with them. I think that is just so important, because then it kind of creates it creates a good network, because those officials who you deem as high quality, should be officiating all the big games, the state level games, they're going to be getting those games because the assigner is going to do that. If multiple coaches are telling them that, those officials who are kind of mid-level, okay, the assigner will talk to them. Good assigners will communicate with all of their officials and evaluate them and give them feedback. Not all assigners do. I'm not saying that. I'm not calling anyone out in general. I think, you know, all the assigners that I work with in Wisconsin and Illinois and Minnesota, I think do a good job, and I have good relationships with them. But I think it's just super important that assigners should be evaluating, should be communicating with their officials. This is what you should be getting better at. That's why I think the best assigner or commissioner that you could possibly have is a current official or a former official, because they know what it takes to be a good official. Those who are maybe former athletic directors or just athletic directors in general, I think, I have a couple commissioners who are athletic directors or former athletic directors. I think they do a good job in getting the right officials where they want to be, but that's because those coaches are communicating with them.
Yeah.
So what you often see, maybe in a big conference game, you might see not so good officials officiating that. Well, it's probably because the coaches aren't giving feedback to the conference or association assigner, and the assigner just doesn't care who gets the games.
Yeah.
It comes down to politics or whatever.
Right.
And
right.
I hate politics, whether it's, whoever the hell's president, who's getting games where or whatever. I just hate it all. I wish we all were just one big happy family, but obviously with what's going on in the world right now, we're seeing that we really aren't.
Yeah.
But anyways, what I'm getting at is just coaches need to communicate good with their assigners. Assigners just need to communicate with their officials. And I think if we can do that collectively, we are going to start having better officials. We're going to start having officials who are learning stuff. There are a lot of officials that I know. I know in Illinois, you are required to do a clinic every 3 years, which I think is awesome. I think it is something that every state should adopt for their officials. But in Wisconsin, I know some officials who have never been to a clinic in their lives, and they're 50 or 60 and have been officiating for 30 years.
Huh.
And my question to them is, how are you getting better?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of getting off track there. I know we're supposed to be sticking with coaches, but that's something that
it makes sense.
Something with officials is just, the initiative has got to be there too.
Yeah.
I know I talk an awful lot for being just 19 years old, and I could be wrong about a lot of stuff, but it's just my what I'm seeing in my first year, and just what I think could improve upon. I know some officials do agree with me. Some officials may not agree with me, which is okay. We can all have opinions. But I think that's just what it comes down to, is working together. Coaches got to give feedback. Assigners have to work with their officials. And I think it just creates a good positive circle that everyone can work with.
Well, there's a couple of things in your answer that I think are just so important to reiterate is that, number one, figure out a way to give feedback to your officials, figure out a way to get that information out there, because as you mentioned, we want the best officials to be doing the state championship games and those real highly important games. And especially for younger officials who may not have that reputation or may not be well known, I think one of the easiest ways to build that reputation is to have coaches advocate for that ref and say, hey, this ref did a great job. And if multiple coaches start saying that, that's hugely important for a younger referee to kind of build their reputation and get those more prestigious assignments. I think that's really key. Mm-hmm.
And with that too, some coaches may say, hey, this official needs work. And then in turn, that assigner should be talking to them saying, hey, I recommend this clinic or this clinic. Get better. If we want to build a good network of good officials, we need to start encouraging them to investing a little bit more into it. Yeah. So I think that's just something that, like you touched on, if the coaches communicate with the assigners there, it's going to be huge. I know in Wisconsin, when they create their all conference meetings, that's something that the coaches talk with the assigner is who's good. These are the officials that we should be having. But I think it's really important for an assigner too. If you're going to take on the role of an assigner, you should be watching film on officials. You should be there at games evaluating them, just so you can get a better idea with them. Like I said, it is fantastic when the assigner is a former or current official, because I know like next year, when I'm working a game in Illinois, I'm actually working with my assigner. He's officiating the game with me. I think that's huge. I think that's an awesome opportunity to be able to work with him, because I know he's a former college official. He might say, I don't think he's still doing college games, but I know he has officiated college in the past. I think that's just so big. It's a big opportunity for me. I'm excited to learn. I'm excited to learn what I need to do better at. So I think that's just huge. If we can build that network, I think a lot of problems with officials, coaches can be answered.
But building the network is hugely important, having that open communication. And then if we as coaches and as teachers or whatever profession are always looking to get better, it only makes sense that an official is doing the same, looking to improve and looking to be the best official that they can be as well. I mean, that absolutely makes sense to me. So This last question, we've really touched on it a lot, and so we're just going to kind of like wrap it up in a bow and just make sure that we get the highlights of some of the things that we've already talked about. So basically, in a nutshell, what can coaches specifically do to make sure that they're working together with referees to ensuring player success? I know we mentioned communication, so I'm sure we'll bring that up again.
Yep.
But what can we make sure as coaches that we are consistently doing and always thinking about to make sure that we're on the same page with our referees and we're working together to make it the best experience for our players?
Well, I think it starts out with I'll just talk through how I would do it as a coach. I haven't had the opportunity to be a coach at the JV or the varsity level yet. I hope to one day maybe be there. But how I would do it is first, I know in the WIA you can look at who's going to be officiating your game before the game happens. So I go and I look at my officials. I maybe just search them in the directory, see what level they are, see where they're from, stuff like that. If it's a big game, I might text a fellow coach from that area and say, hey, who's this official? Is he good? How does he call the game? Stuff like that. Then I think something that is really overlooked is the pregame conference between the coach and the official. Every state does it different. I've figured that out. In Wisconsin, we don't even talk to the coaches until the last 2 minutes of warm-ups. In Minnesota, you're doing it like 3 minutes in the warm-ups. All of the officials are talking to them. And in Illinois, I think it's 5 minutes into the warm-ups. Only the referee is actually talking to the coaches, and that's it. I don't know how they do it down in Arizona.
It's a quick one. It's a quick one right before tip-off.
but I think so. I as an official, I just go with, hey, coach, everyone properly equipped, and you say most likely he's going to say yes. And then I go, do you have any questions, comments, or concerns before we get started? Anything that and one that one of my fellow younger officials that I work with, who I really look up to, that really got me going in the lacrosse era, he goes, anything that you have seen from this year that you would like to touch with us on? I think that's a really good question. Is just if an official asks you that, because you can say, yeah, I've seen a lot of hand checking and stuff, and I'd like, or if it's the second time around that you're playing a team in conference, go, yeah, last time we played this team, they hand checked a lot. Can you please watch for it? And as an official, I go, yep, absolutely. And then last I go, on timeouts, can you please let me know right away, 30 or full, so we can get it recorded. Yeah. But I think as a coach, don't blow that off. If you know the official really well, like for me, I usually get to my games about an hour beforehand. Usually the JV game is still going on. I'll take a really good example for some who might be listening from the area. Schellsburg's head coach, who I grew up playing against, and now I'm officiating. I talked to him for a full 15 minutes before the game because I just know him so well, and I established a relationship with them. Be loose when you talk to your officials. If you've had them before or you have relationships, say, hey, how's it going? How's the wife? How's the kids? Whatever. Whatever. I don't really have any wife or kids right now, but
right.
But just kind of talk to them. Don't think of them as just this person who's in the game. Think of them as an individual. Talk to them how you would talk to a fellow coach. Mm-hmm. That's something that I think would be great. And then during the game, like we have already talked about on and on and on, just talk to the official, ask questions, have good conversations, because that's what's going to help you out in the long run.
Yeah. Go ahead. Oh yeah, keep going.
Last thing, if an official emails you for film, give it to them, because they are trying to get better. They are trying to learn. I say probably about I email most of my coaches after games. If it's a Friday game, I'll email them on a Monday, but otherwise usually the day or 2 days after, I'll say, hey, coach, it was great officiating. And I usually do it to the winning coach, which only kind of seems, I guess, kind of what you would do. But I just email a coach. I say, hey, coach, it was great seeing you, great officiating you. Best of luck the rest of the season. I'd really like your film to get better. You can send like Huddle download links to me. Like, I'd really appreciate it. Again, best of luck the rest of the season. Take care. And then signature. And if an official is going out of their way to ask you for film, you should give it to them, because they're just trying to get better. They're not going to go and give it to your conference rival. They're not going to go and, publish it all online. They may use clips. They may use clips of officiating to help use in association meetings, stuff like that. But they're not going to go out and they're not going to go say, hey, everyone, I have so-and-so's film. Who wants it for $100? They're not going to do that. They're going to use it to get better. So I think if you get a request, and unfortunately, I don't think a lot of officials maybe request film. I know up in lacrosse, they do a lot, which is awesome. I love the group of officials that I work with up in lacrosse. They ask for film, and then coaches just don't email them back or nothing. Or the worst case, they'll go, yes, you can have the film, and then they never send it to you. That's one that really gets my gears going, because then sometimes they'll send them another reminder, and then they just won't reply, which really sucks.
That's unfortunate.
So like I'd say, if you're a coach, just give the officials your film, please. It helps us a ton. That's really all I got for that.
Well, I love it because it's just so much about communication, and then it's so much about just building the relationships, being open, being authentic in that pregame meeting if there are questions or if there are concerns. And so often it seems easy to forget that, these officials are people too, and building relationships with coach to official and everything. It's just so much better for everybody in the long run, and not looking at the official as if they're some adversary or enemy that has to be conquered along with the other team. But, like I've mentioned a couple of times, that we're all working together. And you've reiterated that, which I think is great. Well, to wrap up, what I want to do, I know I usually say it's a coaching moment, but I know you're kind of also relatively young in your coaching career, and also we focused a lot on officiating. But feel free if you want to talk about coaching or officiating. What's a moment in either of those fields of yours that you think others can learn from or reflect on?
If you are really into a game, you're frustrated, maybe your players aren't playing well, or you're not getting the calls that you think you should get, don't lash out, don't get pushy, because that grinds an official's gears. I can speak to this as a coach and an official. I have had really good coaches who are great all game. They really get into the game and their team doesn't start playing it well, and then they lash out at me. And then next thing you know, now, we're not in a good situation. We don't have a good relationship. I understand frustration. Officials understand frustration. They understand if a coach just yells something out, and if you just say, okay, at least they know that they've been acknowledged. We understand that there's frustration there. I will speak for myself in a tournament last weekend. I thought there was a player control foul. Granted, the officials were walking up and down the court and they weren't doing their best to get into the best position. But I screamed out. I said, that is a player control, big time. Like I meant it, because I was frustrated. My team wasn't playing well. We were getting beat by about 20. I was trying to coach my team back into the game. And that was a call that really could have shifted momentum. And we didn't get it because an official was maybe just walking down the floor. And he had to stop the game and give me a warning. And I kind of got blue inside. And I was like, why did I just do that? I am an official. I should be ashamed as an official that I just did that. And so I think it's just something is that try your best to keep your cool. Don't take out your frustration on officials, because it's not going to make a good situation. That's just something. And like I said, I know it's hard. We as officials, good officials, know it's hard. But it's just something that you just got to keep under control, because otherwise it could bite you back in the long run.
Absolutely. And I like that you mentioned too that officials, they recognize what coaches go through. They recognize the stress. They recognize the frustration that comes at times. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because officials are understanding in my experience too. I've never have been an official, but I found that officials definitely have some understanding, or a lot of understanding rather, about what coaches experience and those emotions. So thank you for mentioning that.
You bet.
So to wrap up, coach and official, all the titles that you get, I'm going to give that 60-second soapbox to you that I give to all of my guests, where they can wrap up with their final thought, their final idea, address something that maybe they didn't get to before, whatever it is that you would like. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Communication. have good communication. I stress to my players on defense, if you guys aren't communicating, how are we going to win games, right? And that can be spoken true for us as officials, coaches, and assigners even. Just communicate. Be committed to your role when it comes to that kind of stuff. If you're a coach, be committed to coaching your players. If you're an official, be committed to officiating the game and being better. If you're an assigner, do your best to be communicative with your coaches and your officials. Mm-hmm. I love everything that I do. I love being official. I love every single athletic director, assigner that I work with. They are all awesome people, and they do a lot to make the game of basketball work. And I can't ever thank them enough for what they do. And as a coach, I love every single one of my players. I'm a big individual development coach as well. It's something with AAU with me. I think a lot of it has geared away from player development and more about college offers, which it is part about, but player development too. Like with every single one of my players, if they've reached out to me and they ask for individual stuff, I do it for them. I work with them. I've had some players who have asked me so far in the season what they can work on. And I do that too. I'll give them that feedback. I'm committed to my players. I'm committed to seeing my players succeed. I love my team. I love what I do. So what it just comes down to is just be committed in whatever role you take in and communicate well, and things are going to get better, and things are going to be a lot more of an enjoyable experience for everyone.
Love it. Love the positivity. I think that's a great message to leave off on. And so much of this, like you said, comes down to communication and comes down to being open and having that positive mindset. And that's just a great point to reiterate and end on. So I want to thank you again. I always say coach, but it's coach, official, jack of all trades. Cade Murray, it's been great. It's been insightful. And I think there's so much that we can reflect on or just take from this discussion that hopefully creates a positive relationship with everybody, coaches, officials, and players. So I want to thank you again. Good luck with officiating and good luck with coaching going forward.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. This is an awesome thing that you're doing, and I hope it can grow. I think that we can learn a lot as coaches off of this, and I am excited to see what this is going to grow into moving forward.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and it keeps me motivated to make sure that we're bringing these awesome interviews like this one. So thank you. This is another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.